Chapter 5. Adam's heart jumped in his chest at the sight of Elle walking toward him. Her fingers clung to his grandfather's arm. His gaze took in her creamy skin, feminine curves, full and rounded lips. She was stunning. Elle moved gracefully between the two rows of wedding guests. He stood waiting, his brother Jack beside him as best man and Elle's friend Bella as maid of honor. The evening sun shone through the trees surrounding the ranch and each of the wedding guests in its warm light. Adam's heart lurched with pride as she looked up at his granddad, a small smile hovering over her lips. His mom had insisted Elle wear her wedding dress, a traditional gown with soft white satin that hung elegantly on her. The train spilled its embroidered white waves behind her onto the red carpet where she walked. A week ago, when Elle casually mentioned they could have the wedding on the ranch, Adam was happy she'd thought of it. Grant's Ranch was the perfect spot. The history of this place mirrored a blend of old traditions with new beginnings and the love of family mixed with a sense of belonging. Maybe that was why he loved this old ranch so much. Just a week ago, Adam had hired the decorator. Countless flowers, the red carpet, and the beautiful archway behind him proved that he'd hired someone who did a wonderful job quickly. He wanted this to look like a real wedding to please his mother and grandparents, so he had spared no expense. Caterers had already set up the reception table and the many tables for the guests, ready to serve. As he looked out toward the small group of wedding guests and saw his mom and grandparents smiling up at him, he had an uncomfortable twinge. His conscience got the better of him. He might have fudged the truth a little, but he'd never outright lied. He had too much respect for them. But with this fake marriage, wasn't he lying now? When Adam had taken Elle to meet his mom and grandparents last week, they had been excited to meet her. They believed Adam and his wife-to-be were in love. It seemed both of them had played their parts well. Adam didn't like deceiving them, but he was desperate to do whatever it took to inherit the old homestead. He had to make this marriage look real. As he looked down at Elle's beautiful face and form, his attraction to her only grew. Adam wanted to know all her thoughts. He wanted to know all her secrets. He wanted to know the desires of her heart. At this moment, he was less worried about acting like he was in love than about falling wildly in love with her. He was convinced Elle was no different than Alicia Wentworth, wanting his money more than him. But the biggest reason that he couldn't let himself fall in love was the truth that all the people in his life he cared about suffered or died. They weren't safe around him. Period. Only by keeping that reminder in the forefront of his mind would his heart be safe. Soft music played in the background as Elle finally came to stand beside Adam. Granddad lifted her hand and kissed it, winking at her before he sat down. Elle smiled a little at his mischievousness. She looked up at Adam, who held out his hand. She placed her small hand inside his. Elle's hand shook slightly, her green eyes large and filled with uncertainty. He squeezed her hand, giving her a reassuring smile as the pastor began to speak. All too soon, it was time for the vows. Elle's voice was little more than a whisper. When it was his turn, he was surprised at the shakiness in his voice as he placed the large diamond on her pale finger. "You may kiss the bride." His hands rested on her shoulders. "You're beautiful," he whispered. His heart beat wildly at the sight of her upturned face. Large green eyes stared expectantly into his own. Gently, his mouth claimed hers. She tasted so warm and familiar, as if he had already spent a lifetime with her in his arms, as if she were meant to spend a lifetime there. He had waited for this moment. Adam tasted her sweetness and cradled her closer in his arms, his lips lingering. The quivering in his stomach changed to a warm heaviness. He felt strange and hot. He deepened the kiss, and the ragged pounding in his heart rose higher and higher until the roar filled his ears. Heat and something more, something hotter and more potent, burst open under his skin, leaving him breathless. A gentle cough in the background brought Adam suddenly back to reality. Forcing himself to step away from Elle, Adam stood perfectly still despite the somersaults circling his stomach. Gazing down at his new bride, he pushed away the fear that he liked her kisses a little too much. She looked up, and Adam imagined himself nibbling on her bottom lip once more. The need to haul her back into his arms and kiss her again nearly sent him to the brink of his control. He sent her a lopsided grin, then smiled at the wedding guests as they were officially introduced as husband and wife. As family and friends came to offer their congratulations, Adam stood next to his bride, feeling uncomfortable with his own emotions. Pride and happiness that Elle was a Stevenson now were sentiments that were unfamiliar to him, yet felt so right. "You did good, brother." Jack grabbed him in a quick hug, slapping him on the back. His brother turned to Elle and kissed her on the cheek before he whispered, "Welcome to the family, little sis. Tell that big brother of mine he should take a break from working so hard and have a vacation now that he's married." "I will." The corners of her mouth turned up as Elle beamed up at him. "You're in deep trouble now," Jack grinned, before walking over to talk with other guests. His other 3 brothers followed after Jack, each offering their own words of advice now that she was Adam's wife. Elle smiled at all the attention from his brothers. Adam thought she looked beautiful with her cheeks flushed. Adam gazed at his bride. How would he manage to keep his heart from falling for his new wife? Jack was right. He was in deep trouble now. Elle peered up at Adam, a smile on her face. She wished she knew what he was thinking. He had definitely played his part today, acting like a man marrying for love. Heat spread up her neck to her cheeks, the beats of her heart going 90. Tiny butterflies that began with Adam's kiss were still tickling her belly. She'd enjoyed his care and attention a little too much today. That's what worried her. How would she keep her heart from becoming too deeply involved with her husband? Elle didn't know how she would manage that, but she needed to try. "My mom's coming this way. She's quite taken with you," Adam whispered in her ear, curling his hand around her waist. "It's good to see a young couple in love." Eliza Stevenson slipped her hand inside Elle's and gently squeezed. "Elle, you look beautiful. That dress looks better on you than it did on me 30 years ago." A sheen of tears shone in his mom's eyes as her fingers caressed the sleeve of the wedding gown. She dabbed at the stray tears inching their way down her cheeks. "Look at me. I'm a mess. Adam's wedding at the old ranch house and you wearing that dress, well, it just reminds me of Adam's father. Today brings back all kinds of wonderful, bittersweet memories." Her new mother-in-law's words pricked at her conscience. It was clear Eliza believed their fake marriage was very real, and that her son was in love. Elle would need to be careful not to cause her new mother-in-law any reason to doubt her and Adam's love for each other. "Thank you for letting me borrow your beautiful dress, Mrs. Stevenson." Elle was happy Eliza had insisted she wear her old wedding dress. It was beautiful, with its soft satin and simple design that flowed down from her waist in graceful folds. Elle had never worn anything so beautiful. "Oh, please call me Eliza, or Mom would be even better." Eliza winked at her, leaned closer, and spoke in a half-whisper. "Mrs. Stevenson is my mother-in-law." "I'd be pleased to call you Mom." Elle's mouth curved into a smile. She missed this. Elle swallowed back tears that threatened to spill over. It would be a gift to have a mum in her life once more, even for only a short time. It had been too long since she'd known the gentle touch of a mother. Eliza was kind and compassionate, and she looked amazing. When Eliza smiled, tiny crow's feet appeared by her eyes. She was beautiful. "Calling me Mom would make me happier than anything. I always wanted a daughter in our family." Eliza hugged Elle. "I'm glad." Embraced in the warm cocoon of her mother's arms, she wanted this to last forever. Elle did her best to remind herself that this marriage wasn't real. It was all so Adam could inherit his great-grandfather's homestead, and so she could save her late father's ranch. She needed to remember that. Out of the corner of her eye, Elle saw Adam's grandparents make their way towards them. Adam's grandmom wore a teal-colored dress that highlighted the green of her eyes. Adam's granddad grinned from ear to ear, his wrinkles and gray hair giving him a distinguished look. He had a twinkle in his eye as he walked up to her. "So you're the gal who has put that big smile on my grandson's face." William Stevenson walked up to her in a confident take-charge way, a trait that had been passed down to his grandsons, it seemed. He leaned over and kissed her cheek and whispered, "I'm glad." "Welcome to our family, my dear." Catherine Stevenson pulled Elle into a gentle hug. "Now that you're part of our family, we'll plan a day that's just for us girls. It would be a great way to get to know each other better. That would be really fun, Elle easily agreed. Being pampered had never been something she'd had time or money for. She suddenly realized that for a short while anyway, her life as she knew it had changed. Soon Adam's mum and grandparents left them to sit down at one of the tables. As Adam stopped to talk with a friend, Elle spotted Joanna Kingsley. "I'm glad you came today. It means the world to me." Elle embraced her, needing the support of the one person who had been like a mother to her since she was a little girl. "I wouldn't have missed your wedding day for anything." Joanna looked at her carefully. "But it happened so fast. Is there anything you want to tell me?" Elle could always count on Joanna to speak her mind and get right to the point. "No, Joanna, this is not a have-to wedding." She could almost see the wheels turning in Joanna's mind. She knew her well. "Adam and I just realized how much we suit each other." Joanna eyed her carefully. If she looked too closely, she'd find the cracks in Elle's story. "Being well-suited doesn't mean you're in love. Let me offer a word of advice that I wish I'd learned sooner. Don't let any past hurt, pain, or fear of love steal the happiness of your present or future." Elle swallowed back tears that clogged in her throat and nodded. As usual, Joanna had dived deep into the fear that constantly lurked in the back of her mind. "I'm here for you, my dear. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me, okay?" "I know. Thanks for that. You're the best second mother I could have asked for." Elle smiled at her. "That part's easy with a wonderful girl like you." Joanna squeezed her hand and turned at the sound of the music playing in the background. "I think that's my cue to find a spot to sit at the table. Talk to you later." Joanna squeezed her arm and walked away. Soon Adam found her, and they sat down for a meal. He joined the conversation with his brothers, and before long they were passing jokes back and forth to each other. "I didn't realize Adam had 4 brothers." Bella leaned over to speak in Al's ear as the sound of laughter got louder. "Yes, I didn't realize how close they were to each other. Not to mention, a good fairy has given them each an extra dose of good looks." Bella spoke softly as her gaze glanced in their direction. "You know, even with that scar on his cheek, Jack is still very appealing." "Oh, really?" Al leaned closer until she was eye to eye with her best friend. "Do tell. What is it about Jack that appeals to you?" "Stop teasing me. I just think he's handsome. But he's also very irritating and high-handed. He'd be a great husband for some weak-willed girl that doesn't have a mind of her own, but not for me." To quote Shakespeare, "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." Al winked at her friend. "Let's not talk about me." Bella's cheeks had turned a lovely shade of red from their conversation, which Al found very telling. "I'd rather hear about you. How's it going with you and Adam?" "As well as can be expected. This is just a marriage of convenience, after all." Al's fingers fiddled with the new wedding ring on her left hand. "I think it's much more. Adam's eyes are glued to you, Al. It's like you've just lit up his world. Sort of like the way he's looking at you right now." Elle turned her head slowly to see Adam's blued, penetrating gaze latched onto her. Her heart beat faster, and the corners of her mouth lifted before she turned to talk to Bella. "Well, it's all part of the deal we made to act like we're in love when we're with his family. So if you believe it, then our acting skills are better than I thought." Al shoved back any thoughts of attraction for her new husband. "Yeah, sure. You keep believing that." Bella gave her an "I don't believe you" look that she'd used ever since they were in grade school together. "But just for the record, I think you two would make a great couple if you ever got over your hang-ups with each other." "Well, I'm not convinced." "Maybe your husband can convince you then, because he's walking this way." Bella spoke in a half-whisper, looking over Al's shoulder. Al looked up just in time to find Adam standing in front of her. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Stevenson?" "Of course." Al placed a trembling hand into her husband's steady one. They walked over to the wooden dance floor that Adam had hired contractors to build. It was a large platform, perfect for an outdoor wedding. The decorator had added tiny lights to the wood posts that surrounded the dance floor. Even the trees around the tables and food area had tiny lights weaving in and out of their branches. The miniature lights gave a fairy tale-like atmosphere to the wedding. Adam's hand on the small of her back was warm as he led her to the center of the dance floor. A singer crooned a love song in the background, while Adam slid one hand to her waist and held her hand with the other. Out of the corner of her eye, Elle could see many of the wedding guests watching them as they moved together in this first dance as husband and wife. Nervous about so many people with their eyes on us? Adam leaned forward and pressed warm lips against her forehead. Don't worry. I've got you in case you fall. I appreciate that. She peered up at him. Blue eyes met hers, and an electric jolt rocked Elle as though she touched a live wire. A breathless panic filled her, and she longed to pull her eyes away, anything to escape this fluttery sensation in the pit of her belly. We can do better than this, Adam's warm breath whispered in her ear. Suddenly he moved both hands round her waist and pulled her closer. Elle put her hands lightly on his shoulders, but Adam moved them higher to encircle his neck. Now we're dancing like newlyweds. Adam looked down at her, the mellow lights shining like a homing beacon in his blue eyes. The feel of his arms around her brought with it a jumble of emotions. His touch felt warm and gentle, causing her pulse to trip over itself. When his gaze slid to her lips, desire shot through her, leaving her breathless. She yearned for him to kiss her right there and then. Adam tilted her face up to receive his kiss. As his lips met hers, the pressure of his mouth was as light as the evening sun touching the ocean. As her knees started to weaken from his lingering kiss, Elle forced herself to pull her arms away from around his neck. I think we've convinced them, Elle whispered as she stepped back a little. Their kisses had begun to convince her heart that maybe it would be possible for them to fall in love. It scared her. No, that couldn't happen. She needed to guard her heart. There was no way she could risk loving Adam only to be abandoned again. When Elle pulled her arms away from him, a chill ran up his arms at the sudden loss. He held his hand gently at her waist and entwined his other hand with hers. He loved holding his new wife close. Her kisses were so sweet. It made him want a never-ending buffet of them. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's why she pulled away. Today was supposed to be a wedding ceremony to help everyone believe they were in love. He was sure they convinced them, but it also caused another problem. Suddenly deeper feelings were stirring in him for Elle, strange sentiments of actually wanting to take care of her and be with her often. That need scared Adam. He'd loved before and had suffered heartache. The simple yet scary truth was that most of the people he loved suffered pain or died, including his dad and Elle's dad. Even though his ex-fiancée had used him, Adam felt guilty that somehow he hadn't been or done enough to make her want to stay. Adam couldn't be responsible for loving another person only to see them suffer. He refused to let that happen to Elle. That was why he kept a guard up around his heart. But around Elle, his resolve crumbled. It might prove next to impossible not to get closer to Elle, since tomorrow's surprise would put them in close proximity for at least a week.